Elon Musk seems to have access to all of your private government data. You're cool with that, right? Well, backed by President Trump, Elon Musk has been given the keys to the kingdom, almost literally. Musk and a hodgepodge group of engineers, some as young as 19, successfully secured access to sensitive government databases and the Treasury Department's payment system through an unprecedented series of bureaucratic maneuvers. Musk and his team seem to be operating in secrecy with little to no oversight. And Musk seems to have access to sensitive data about seemingly every American. So everyone has been asking whether it's legal for Elon Musk to have this much power and this much data. And the answer may surprise and disturb you. The new Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent granted Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency team access to the federal payment system, which processes over $5 trillion annually in Social Security, Medicare, and tax refunds. But people who work for Musk at SpaceX and Twitter are now government employees with direct access to all this information. For example, a recent report by Wired revealed that Marco Ellis, a 25-year-old engineer, has direct access to the U.S. Treasury Department's Payment Automation Manager, or PAM, and the Secure Payment System, the SPS. These systems are responsible for managing a significant portion of government disbursements, including Social Security, Medicare benefits, federal salaries, government contracts payments, and tax refunds. Ellis's access reportedly includes administrator-level privileges, allowing him to read and write code within these critical systems. And Ellis reportedly had the ability to make those changes without testing them first. Treasury employees tried to fight back against what they believed to be illegal orders. Acting Treasury Secretary David Lebrick resigned on January 31st, 2025, following a dispute with Musk allies. Lebrick had served in various capacities within the Treasury Department for several decades and was appointed as the Fiscal Assistant Secretary in 2014. CNN reported that Bessent threatened Lebrick with legal consequences if he did not grant DOGE the ability to stop payments. And Musk's control of the Treasury includes the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, which, quote, handles more than 1 billion financial transactions annually for the U.S. government, both outgoing grants and payments and incoming tax receipts. While serving as the largest cash management operation in the world, BFS collects personal and financial information about the people and businesses on the other side of the transactions, including names, social security numbers, birth dates, birthplaces, home addresses and telephone numbers, email addresses, and bank account information. What could Musk do with all of that data? Oh, nothing. Just sell it, use it for blackmail, delete it, alter it, make it all public, or feed it into some giant non-secure AI. It really could be all that bad. And that's just the beginning. Musk has already shared data with outsiders. For example, Musk posted about his fines on Twitter. He revealed specific federal payments to Lutheran social services organizations. Musk called these payments illegal. They are not illegal. The BFS is also responsible for Treasury bond interest payments, and apparently Musk and his team have read-write control of BFS systems, which were coded decades before they were born. So is any of this legal? Well, probably not. Here are all the laws that Musk potentially has broken. Now, the issue is broader than whether Elez or the other DOGE team members could change code. Federal agencies have improperly stopped sending money Congress lawfully allocated. And as we've covered recently, and we'll probably cover again in greater detail, most of it is flatly illegal. The Supreme Court ruled unanimously in Train versus New York that when Congress directs the money to be spent, the president is obligated to do it. Otherwise, Congress's laws, that is, the laws of this country, would be merely advisory to the president. And we kind of fought a war to prevent that. And fundamentally, the president refusing to spend money as Congress directed violates the Appropriations Clause as well as the Take Care Clause of the Constitution. And failing to spend congressionally required funds also violates the Impoundment Control Act of 1974, and spending funds that have not been appropriated or making obligations that exceed agency regulations violate the Anti-Deficiency Act. Now, there are a lot of people who think the government is too large and that it should scale back its spending. That is a totally valid point of view. But what is not legitimate is the executive unilaterally cutting spending required by law in violation of the Constitution and numerous other federal laws. And that is what's happening here. It is incredibly illegal. Moving fast and breaking things doesn't work when you are messing with systems that are, again, required by law. And it's an especially bad sign when the same party controls all three branches of government. Not in the sense of making policy that some people won't like, but in the sense that Trump could accomplish all of these things by simply asking Congress to pass laws to that effect. Congress could pass a law tomorrow to delete USAID, the CFPB, or the Department of Education. But even though Republicans control both houses of Congress, many, if not most, of these cuts would likely fail to pass. And President Trump and Elon Musk seek to circumvent the proper process entirely, while at the same time they vilify the judges who are enjoining their plainly illegal acts and preserving the status quo. But that's probably just the beginning of the illegal acts. What about all the data that they're accessing and changing? Let's start with the Privacy Act of 1974. Under this law, no one can disclose a private record unless, quote, the individual to whom a record pertains consents unless there is an exception. These exceptions would be if officers and employees of the agency, quote, have a need for the record in the performance of their duties, or if there is a routine use stipulated in the SORN. Now, these exceptions don't appear to apply in this case. And Musk's Treasury break-in also arguably violates the Internal Revenue Code section 6103, which protects taxpayer information from unauthorized access or disclosure. The BFS processes tax returns and other IRS-related payments. And by giving DOGE operatives access to these systems, IRS records, including individual tax return data, may have been improperly exposed. Section 6103 prohibits federal employees and third parties from accessing or disclosing taxpayer return information unless specifically authorized. This section of the law was strengthened after Richard Nixon misused tax records to target political opponents. Now, even high-ranking officials, including the president, have limited access to tax return data, at least in theory. Now, willful unauthorized access or disclosure of tax return information is a felony under IRC 7213, punishable by fines and imprisonment. Additionally, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act makes it a crime to intentionally access a federal computer system without authorization or exceed authorization access to obtain sensitive information. 18 U.S.C. 1030 covers the theft or misuse of government data, and we already know that Musk has shared specific federal payment records, which could be evidence of unauthorized disclosure of protected data. Under that same section, there's intentional damage to a protected computer, which punishes unauthorized access for personal or political gain. Those sections might apply if DOGE accessed Treasury data for political targeting, corporate advantage, or to manipulate federal spending. The CFAA violations carry severe consequences, including fines and up to 10 years in prison for serious offenses. There's also the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which limits access to credit data that includes Social Security numbers to those who have a permissible purpose under the law. And then the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, known as HIPAA, protects the privacy of health information that identifies an individual and restricts healthcare organizations from disclosing such information to others without the patient's consent. And obviously, it's illegal to disclose someone's Social Security number without their consent. The Identity Theft and Assumption Deterrence Act, 18 U.S.C. 1028, also applies. This law makes it a federal crime to knowingly and intentionally use someone's Social Security number to commit identity theft or fraud. Penalties for identity theft can include fines and imprisonment up to 15 years or both. And there's also the Social Security Number Protection Act of 2010, which imposes restrictions on the use of Social Security numbers by businesses and entities. And many states have their own laws and provide additional protection for Social Security numbers, including restrictions on how Social Security numbers can be used, shared, and stored. But it seems like DOGE's access to the U.S. Treasury means that Musk can see all federal disbursements, including those from the Department of Veterans Affairs. This system contains sensitive information such as Social Security numbers and VA benefit details of numerous veterans. 38 U.S.C. 5701 protects veterans' records held by the VA, including benefits, medical history, and personal identifiers. And VA records cannot be shared without the veteran's consent. But Musk's actions also pose massive foreign intelligence and espionage risks. Past government breaches, including the 2013 OPM hack by Chinese operatives, highlight how dangerous it is when government data is not properly secured. And the irony of all this is that just 6 weeks ago, the US government was sounding the alarm about China using TikTok to steal your private information, and now the government is handing over private information to Elon Musk personally. Now, obviously, if you're going to try and shut down the entire government, you'll probably want a good lawyer. But if you want a great lawyer, let my law firm, the Eagle Team, help. If you've gotten in a car crash, if you've suffered a data breach, especially if you got one of those data breach letters saying that your information might have been leaked, or are dealing with a workers' comp or social security issue, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney. It's so important to talk to a lawyer right away so you can maximize your recovery. And by the way, we don't get paid unless you do, so there's nothing up front. So click on the link in the description or call the phone number that's on screen for a free consultation with my team. Because you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle Team. But unfortunately, it's a big problem when the alarm is coming from inside the house. So many of these laws require enforcement by the executive. And if the executive grants authority or just refuses to prosecute violations, there's not a lot that can be done, which leaves a limited number of instances when private citizens can sue on their own behalf. Now, citizens can sue the government if their privacy rights are violated under certain privacy acts. And that's already started to happen. On February 3rd, the Alliance for Retired Americans, the AFL-CIO, and the Service Employees International Union filed lawsuits against Besant, the Department of the Treasury, and the BFS. The plaintiffs seek declaratory and injunctive relief to stop the unlawful disclosure of personal and financial information to Elon Musk and members of DOGE. The plaintiffs argue that millions of individuals, including retirees, taxpayers, federal employees, and contractors, are affected by this unprecedented access, compromising their sensitive data without their consent. The federal employees did not consent to these disclosures, nor, I assume, did anyone who was watching this video. The plaintiffs say that when Besant gave DOGE full access to the Bureau's records and computer systems, he violated the Privacy Act of 1974's public notice requirements. And additionally, the complaint alleges that when the Treasury makes a change of this magnitude under the Administrative Procedures Act, it must give a System of Records Notice, or SORN, in the Federal Register for 30 days while allowing public comment before taking any action. And on February 6th, a federal judge granted plaintiffs a preliminary injunction limiting the access of DOGE employees to the Treasury. Now, the order is a mixed bag. It does not give Musk the ability to review or change Treasury data, which is good, but this may not matter since Musk has had access to the data for at least 2 weeks. And the judge's order permits special government employee Marco Elez to have read-only access to the Treasury systems. But a Wired report on February 7th asserted that the Department of Justice lied about whether Elez had right access or not. And following that report, Elez resigned from DOGE after his social media posts were discovered. He apparently advocated for eugenics and for the repeal of the Civil Rights Act. Elez tweeted, quote, "Normalize Indian hate, and 99% of Indian H-1Bs will be replaced by slightly smarter LLMs. They're going back, don't worry, guys." And, quote, "You couldn't pay me to marry outside of my ethnicity." But don't worry, Musk conducted a poll on Twitter about whether Elez should return. And what a surprise, the incel brigade on Twitter thinks that he should return. Vice President J.D. Vance, who is married to an Indian American, and President Trump also spoke out on his behalf. But it looks like the restrictions will remain in place while the lawsuit proceeds. But again, this is a mixed bag. Several reporters have claimed that DOGE employees, including Elez, have already made extensive changes to the payment system's codebase with limited oversight. But the judge's order put a stop to that, and hopefully DOGE employees will actually follow the order. Yeah, you can bet that you're gonna hear me say, hopefully they follow the court order a lot in the coming years. Yeah, can we just make up a graphic that says, hopefully they follow the court order? Because we're gonna do that a lot. Additionally, Secretary Besant has now appointed Silicon Valley's Tom Krause as his assistant. So apparently Krause is one of Musk's top lieutenants, and he now has access to the payment system as well. And to summarize, Krause told Treasury career staff to stop payments to USAID. The staffer resisted, saying it was illegal, and the staffer was ousted. Krause is now head of payments at Treasury. Of course, the question on everyone's minds is who would prosecute Elon Musk and his operatives for disclosing taxpayer information. Now, traditionally, the FBI and the Department of Justice would investigate and prosecute people who break the law. But the Department of Justice is now stacked with MAGA lawyers like Ed Martin, who threatened to prosecute anyone who refused to give Musk and his men the access they demanded. Ed Martin is the current U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, and he's also the guy that dismissed charges against one of the January 6th insurrectionists, who he happened to be currently representing in private practice. You just can't make this up. Adding to our nightmares that Trump is trying to lay off over 5,000 of the FBI's 13,700 agents, basically half of the FBI, and is poised to install Kash Patel as head of the FBI. But the states do have a role to play in enforcing the law, and a coalition of 19 Democratic states' attorneys general have filed a lawsuit to prevent DOGE from accessing federal payment systems containing sensitive personal information. And there, the plaintiffs argue that granting DOGE access to sensitive Treasury payment systems is arbitrary and capricious, lacks proper justification, and did not follow required procedures, thereby violating the Administrative Procedure Act. The states contend that DOGE's access to Treasury records could interfere with funding already appropriated by Congress, exceeding the Treasury Department's statutory authority and violating the constitutional principle of separation of powers. They assert that Trump's actions violate the Take Care Clause of the Constitution, and the state's plaintiffs are also concerned that DOGE's access poses significant cybersecurity risks that may compromise sensitive personal information and the integrity of the federal payment system. And related to that, a federal judge has temporarily blocked DOGE from accessing the Treasury's payment system. The judge said, quote, "The court's firm assessment is that for the reasons stated by the states, they will face irreparable harm in the absence of injunctive relief. That is both because of the risk that the new policy presents of the disclosure of sensitive and confidential information, and the heightened risk that the systems in question will be more vulnerable than before to hacking. The court's further assessment is that, again, for the reasons given by the states have shown a likelihood of success on the merits of their claims, with the state's statutory claims presenting as particularly strong. The court's further assessment is that the balance of the equities, for the reasons stated by the states, favors the entry of emergency relief." And the judge has now granted the plaintiff state's motion for enforcement of a temporary restraining order. Now, mind you, a TRO is ultra temporary. It's just preserving the status quo so the court can learn more about the situation and the parties can provide further briefing. But the court issued the TRO to prohibit the defendants from implementing a broad categorical freeze on federal spending. The court agreed with plaintiffs that the Trump administration is not complying with the order, and the judge emphasized that the government must promptly comply with court orders, citing Manis versus Myers, the Supreme Court, which says, quote, "Persons who make private determinations of the law and refuse to obey an order generally risk criminal contempt, even if the order is ultimately ruled incorrect." The court found that the defendants had notice of the TRO, that the order was clear and unambiguous, and that there were no impediments to compliance. Despite this, evidence presented by the plaintiff states indicated that the defendants continued to freeze federal funds and refused to resume disbursement of appropriated funds, which violated the TRO. The Trump administration argued that the freezes were intended to prevent fraud. However, the court noted that these freezes resulted from a broad categorical order rather than a specific findings of potential fraud. The court reiterated that such sweeping freezes are likely unconstitutional and cause for irreparable harm, thus violating the TRO. So what does the Trump administration have to do now? Well, quote, "Immediately restore frozen funding during the pendency of the TRO until the court hears and decides the preliminary injunction request. immediately end any federal funding pause during the pendency of the TRO, immediately take every step necessary to effectuate the TRO, including clearing any administrative, operational, or technical hurdles to implementation, comply with the plain text of the TRO not to pause any funds based on pronouncements pausing funding incorporated into the OMB directive, like Section 7A of the Unleashing Executive Order and the OMB Unleashing Guidance, immediately restore withheld funds, including those federal funds appropriated in the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Improvement and Jobs Act, and resume the funding of institutes and other agencies of the defendants, for example, the National Institute for Health, that are included in the scope of the court's TRO. Now, so far, the Trump administration has been at least telling the court that they are complying or attempting to comply with various orders. It'll be another issue entirely if they just outright ignore orders like Musk and Trump have been saying that they will do. So it's going to be important to watch what happens in the wake of this particular TRO. Now, when the court stopped Elon Musk from accessing US Treasury data, almost 400 sources reported on it, with the vast majority of them coming from the center and the left. But when you examine the headlines, you start to see some very different frames emerge that shape how readers interpret and understand the events that are unfolding. On the right, headlines emphasize Musk's claims that he found $50 billion worth of fraud at the Treasury Department, implying these claims correlate to the judge's ruling and implying that Elon Musk actually did find fraud. And headlines from the right also point to small legal ambiguities in the judge's ruling that could lead to it being overturned, a story angle largely absent from headlines on the left and center sources, who mainly focus on the risks of Elon Musk having unfettered access to sensitive and critical data. Now, the headlines you read first have immense power to shape how you understand the news. And that's why I like to see the news from as many angles as possible, which I can do with the help of today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. And right now they're offering LegalEagle viewers 40% off their unlimited access Vantage subscription. You can scan the QR code or use the link in the description to get a discount for a limited time. Because Ground News gathers related articles from around the world and across the political spectrum, so you can see the bias and compare coverage. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. One of my favorite parts is their bias comparison feature, which highlights specific differences in reporting across the political spectrum. This can be especially helpful when reading stories from sources you've never heard of, where there's no telling who owns it or what agenda they might have. I also love their blind spot feature, which shows you stories that are underreported by either side of the political spectrum. Like this recent story that explains all the ways in which Tesla benefited from Elon Musk's adventures in government, which was largely ignored by the right. Understanding how blind spots shape bias helps explain why we often talk past each other and why some people seem hyper-focused on what seems like nonsense, often because of some random blog post that went viral among a certain group of people. But all this is why Ground News is my favorite way to get the news. And as a LegalEaglet, you can save 40% off of the Ground News Vantage subscription by scanning the code that's on screen or clicking the link down below. This subscription gives you unlimited access to every feature, including the Bias Insight tool and blind spot feed. And by subscribing, you'll support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent. So click on the link or scan the code today. And after that, click on this link over here for more LegalEagle, or I'll see you in court.